This video is all about Canon's upcoming R100. It's going to be their lowest price R system APS-C camera to date, and it's designed to replace cameras like the SL2 or even the SL3. We've got leaked specifications, details coming up, but first, I encourage you to subscribe and choose all notifications so you're kept informed on the latest camera gear, news, and rumors. Canon Rumors just posted a wonderful story about a much anticipated, affordable replacement for the SL2 and even the SL3, and that's the Canon EOS R100, a camera expected to cost between $499 and $599, an APS-C R system camera that's going to look and feel like the Canon M6 Mark II. So what are the leaked specifications for the Canon EOS R100? Well, let's start off with the sensor size. 24.2 megapixels, obviously it's going to be an APS-C sensor, there's no mention of BSI or stacked, and I really wouldn't expect to see those capabilities in a sensor at a camera around this price point of $599 for 24.2 megapixels. Can you recall another recently announced Canon camera that has the same sensor size? That's also APS-C? That's right, the Canon EOS R10. It has a 24.2 megapixel sensor. Could these two cameras have the same sensor? And the answer is yes. And it would make a lot of sense because Canon wouldn't have to come up with a new component and they could get better economies of scale. And what about the image processor? Again, I'm going to give you a chance to guess at what the image processor is going to be. You already guessed it. Yeah, obviously it's going to be the Digic X processor. The Digic X processor is very fast. It came out in the 1DX Mark III, Canon's 1 series camera, and it only had one, and that tells you how fast this sensor is. And it's so fast that Canon put it in the R5, they put it in the R6, and they thought, why stop there? Let's put it in the R3, as well as the R7 and the R10. So it really isn't a surprise that Canon would put the same image processor, the Digic X, that they put in all their cameras since the 1DX Mark III in the Canon EOS R100. This camera is much faster than other cameras that it's designed to replace. Let's go back in time. That SL2, which you can no longer find in retail stores, had a continuous shooting with autofocus of around 2 to 3 frames per second. I think it was around 2.5 frames per second. Continuous shooting. I mean, it was really slow. And if you look at the time, I think the Canon 70D was around 7 frames per second. The 80D was 7 or 8 frames per second. So the Canon EOS R100 with 12 frames per second mechanical, that's really fast. And yes, you heard correctly, 12 frames per second. So does that mean in electronic mode we'll have something like 15 or 20 frames per second? Well, it's certainly possible we will have an electronic mode, but I don't think it's going to go as fast as the Canon EOS R7 or even the R10. I think if it does have a mechanical mode, it might top out at 15 frames per second, but let's just focus for a minute here. If it can provide 12 frames per second, and the image processor, the Digic X, can certainly handle that, if it can provide 12 frames per second with autofocus, and you hold on that shutter button for a second, and you get 12 frames, and 80% or more are in focus, properly exposed, that's huge. For the ordinary average filmmaker and photographer, if you're shooting and you've got the capability of going 12 frames per second, that's more than enough for sports. That's more than enough for water skiing or cars. We're not talking about professionals here. Yes, I understand that 20 and 30 frames per second is what professionals need if they're covering motorsports or water skiing, but for ordinary people, to have a camera that costs around $499 or $599, if the rumors are to be believed, 12 frames per second is pretty impressive. But now for the video specifications for the Canon EOS R100. It's going to be capable of 4K, 24, 25, and 30 frames per second UHD. Seems pretty good, right? Well, no, not really. I mean, every camera out that can do 4K video these days at 24, 25, and 30 frames per second. It's not rocket surgery to be able to do that. And if we look at Canon of old, what would happen when we got to 4K 30? Well, they'd start to put in contrast detect autofocus system. They'd start to give us a 1.7 time or 1.6 times crop on an already 1.6 times crop because the camera has a crop sensor of 1.6. So here's a few things that Canon could do to improve the video quality of this camera. First of all, scrap contrast detect at 30, 24, and 25 frames per second. Let that phase detect autofocus system Phase 2, that's right, is going to have the dual pixel autofocus Mark II, the one found in the R5 and the R6, in the R100. So let that function and work at the higher frame rates and resolutions. And also eliminate that crop. And if you are going to give us a crop, don't make it more than 1.05 or 1.1. I saw this with the Canon 90D, and taking that extra crop, that 1.1 times crop, but with the extra detail, was well worth it. And that's what really matters here, is the level of detail. And what I'm really concerned about is oversampled 4K video. The Canon EOS R10, a camera that sells for $979 body alone, $1,099 with a kit lens, has 6K oversampled 4K. The R7, 7K oversampled 4K. This is a 24.2 megapixel sensor. If they're going to do oversampled video, it's going to be 24.2 megapixels worth, which means 6K oversampled 4K. Will they give us the same video resolution and frame rate as a Canon EOS R10? This is where I'm not sure. And this is where the R100 can go from being a truly amazing camera at a value price of around $599 or $499 with 12 frames per second electronic or mechanical, high continuous shooting rates, but then really good video, 4K up to 30 frames per second UHD with oversample 4K and with autofocus, dual pixel autofocus Mark II functioning in that highest frame rate, 30 frames per second. Now, I don't expect any log footage, whether it be Canon log 1, 2, or 3. The R10 didn't get it, so don't look for that here, but still, this is what could turn this R100 into a truly amazing camera. Or will the Canon Cripple Hammer come out and just completely smash the video specs in this camera, doing what they've done before in other Canon cameras, APS-C cameras at this price point, giving us contrast detect autofocus system at 30 frames per second and not giving us oversampled 4K video. We'll just have to wait and see. You know, other specifications for this camera, it's not going to have an EVF. That's right, no EVF on this camera, although when this camera does announce, it's supposed to come with some other accessories. So don't be surprised if the R100 comes with an optional viewfinder priced between $89 and $149. And the LCD, don't worry, it's a flip screen, and it's going to have a resolution of 1.04 million dots. I'm not too terribly excited by the R100 leaked specifications because look at any camera around this price range, and this is what you can expect. There's nothing to get me super excited here. Yesterday, I put out a video about the OM5, a new camera to come out from OM Systems, formerly known as Olympus, and it had some rather bland specifications, but a retail price of $1,600, $1,599. And based on those specifications and that price, it seemed rather, well, boring. And that's a problem with these leaked specifications. They don't give us enough detail to get us super excited. 24.2 megapixel sensor, really good news there. A Digic X image processor, really good news there. 12 frames per second mechanical, very good. But 4K 30, without knowing if it's providing us with oversample, without knowing if there's a crop, without knowing that that dual pixel autofocus Mark II is going to function on all video modes and resolutions, it's really hard to get a grasp of what this camera is capable of. We do know it's going to have a single SD card slot. It's going to be UHS 2, of course, but outside of that, it's really hard to say. And not having an EVF is not a problem in this price range. I know some of you would never buy a camera without an EVF, me inclusive, but at $599 or $499, it can help reduce the price of the camera by $100. And at this market, at this price point, it's talking to people that don't use an EVF. A lot of people who are using smartphones don't use an EVF. The younger generation doesn't really care about an EVF. So if you give them a camera that just has this large screen, this flip screen, they're going to be perfectly happy with it. And if you don't like not having an EVF, you're probably looking at a more expensive camera to begin with. So how credible are these rumors? Well, Canon Rumors puts this as a CR1, which also doesn't have me super excited because a CR1 means it's coming from an unknown source. It hasn't been trusted or validated. Even if it hasn't been trusted or validated, I think I know why Canon Rumors went ahead and put this out there. Because if you look at the specifications, it's like, well, yeah, any analyst or consensus would say, yeah, Digic X makes sense. It was in the R10. 24.2 megapixel sensor, yeah, that was in the R10 too, so that makes sense. Let's reuse those components. That's good for the ROI and EBITDA. But what else? Well, okay, single card slot, sure. No EVF, yeah, that makes sense too. We've seen that with other cameras in this price point. 12 frames per second, that's high. That sparked my interest. So what's the buffer like? If you hold down that shutter button, can you go half a second or two? That will make a difference. And video, 4K. Well, of course, who can't do 4K anymore? 4K is no longer a luxury item that you find in a 1 series or a 5 series camera. Even the latest iPhone can now do 48 megapixels, more than my Canon EOS R5. So these specs alone are not exciting. In fact, they're pretty mediocre. It's how they enable the capabilities. Oversample 4K video, dual pixel autofocus in every mode, accurate 12 frames per second mechanical. Then yes, this could be a very, very powerful camera, a very powerful travel camera, compact at $599. Now, in terms of announcement, it's rumored that this camera is coming out in 2022 and October, so tomorrow. Well, it's actually not going to come out tomorrow. October starts tomorrow. There's a pretty good chance that we'll see this camera announced in October. Most camera companies do not announce cameras in November and December. Anything that's usually announced in September and October will start shipping in November and December. And if you want to stay up to date on the latest camera news and rumors, go ahead and click that subscribe button, but please choose all notifications. By choosing all notifications, as soon as I publish a new video like this one on the Canon EOS R100, or a video on the OM5, the R100, the A7R5, you'll be the first to know. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.